Hi, I'm Matt Williams. Welcome to Glimpses, the podcast where we talk about life, love, creativity, and all that spiritual stuff. My guest today is the indomitable and charismatic Thomas Keone, founder and CEO of Many Hopes. Thomas was born in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. He was educated at Queen's University, Belfast, and worked for one of the two Nobel Prize-winning signatories of the Belfast Peace Agreement. He is a former columnist. His career has spanned the media, politics, for-purpose missions in the UK, USA, Africa, and Latin America. Thomas, welcome to Glimpses.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Matt. Indomitable and charismatic. Could we say that again? That would be great.
He's indomitable and he's charismatic.
You know, that's the second time in my life I've heard that. So, so thank you.
He's also a little Irish. There's a little bit of Irish in there.
Just on my mother's side, father's side, and by birth.
Okay. So let's talk about Many Hopes. The mission, and I pulled this from your site, equipping children to become men and women who break cycles of injustice. That is a noble cause. How do you do that?
That's a big vision, to be sure, and a big question, to be sure. Okay. So how long do we have?
You have a lot of time. Let it rip.
That's a relief. Many Hopes, I suppose, for a non-profit organization, we make a bold, some would say peculiar, proclamation for how we will do that. We tell people very clearly, we as a charity will not solve any of the big problems of the world. We won't defeat any of the giant injustices of the world. What we will do is raise and equip local children who've survived them, who will do that. So the heart of Many Hopes is rescuing survivors, rescuing children from situations of injustice and abuse. That could be modern day slavery, sexual abuse, trafficking, simple abandonment and grinding poverty of street life, and walking with them for the long road all the way until early adulthood, when they're ready for college, entrepreneurship, or employment and a flourishing adult life. Success for Many Hopes looks like, in any community where we have ever worked, the day will come when outside charity isn't necessary there because local survivors are fighting and winning the battles against injustice where they are themselves.
And the primary way you do that is through education. That's why I'm so attracted to Many Hopes. To talk about the schools, because you're in, 6 different countries now?
We're in 6 different locations, 3 in Latin America and 3 on the continent of Africa, Ghana, Malawi and Kenya, and Guatemala, Bolivia and Peru. And while there's no one single solution to any of the very complex issues and injustices that we battle, of all of the things that we provide, all the tools we provide to any child we encounter, education is the number 1, 2, and 3. When we meet any child in any street or any abuse situation anywhere, and they have, let's say, no food, no shoes, no family, no home, and we ask them, is there, what do you want? The answer is almost always the same: take me to school. And our model of school is not what perhaps when you hear a charity guy talk on a podcast about building schools, our schools probably aren't what you think of.
What are they? Explain that.
We like to think of our schools as a school that you would send your children to. We're all about raising up change makers in their own local communities, which requires schooling of a quality that you don't just become an adult who subsists, but an adult who influences. A school that gives a child a real shot at getting to college or being an entrepreneur one day.
And then possibly coming back and giving back, correct?
Not only possibly, but almost certainly.
Good.
The very heart of Many Hopes is that children who've survived let's use a real practical example. Children who have survived modern day slavery have a unique perspective on that problem. They have a tenacious desire to do something about that, but they lack access to the tools that they need to act on that desire, and education is the primary tool. So what we see is in the heart, children have the heart and desire to fix the brokenness in their own community, not depend on outsiders to do so. They just need education to enable them to do that. So we see children from 8, 9, 10 years of old, 10 years of age saying, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a journalist, I want to be a psychologist, I want to run a home like this, I want to work here. They have a desire to give to others what they receive from Many Hopes and others.
And I think you touched on something. It's very important you get them, if you can, when they're young. Because wouldn't you say the younger you can get the children off the street, out of enslavement, out of poverty, and into school, the better their chances of succeeding?
Reaching a child early, we try to start at 6 years old or below, for a couple of reasons. One, if you're bearing the goal in mind, the goal is to equip that child to become an adult of influence. If you're 15 and have never received any schooling, you've got a lot to catch up to. Number one. But number two, one of the greatest weapons that those who oppress the weaker and the marginalized use is despair. They condition folks to believe there's nothing I can do. Things will never be different. There's no point in me trying to make something different. But we know that's not true. We're made in the image of our Maker with immense, immeasurable value and unlimited potential. So reaching a child early before despair or I can't sets in, and unlocking the I can do that it's miraculous, and it's beautiful to get a glimpse of.
I like the fact that you used the word glimpse. But I want to talk about your origin story. I know what inspired the divine nudge, the first little spiritual nudge to start Many Hopes, and it's a story about gift. I know that story, but would you please share it with the listeners?
So often when I'm introduced, as I was on this podcast today, it's Thomas Keone is the founder of Many Hopes. Within Many Hopes, we consider a 6-year-old girl to be our founder, and her name is Gift, or Zawadi in Swahili. When Gift was 6 years old, she didn't know her father, and she lost her mother to HIV. She was wandering the streets of Mombasa, the second largest city in Kenya, begging for food, carrying on her back her infant brother, unaware that he was dead already.
Oh my God.
While she carried him around in the street. And a friend of mine, a journalist, I was at that time a very keen amateur journalist, a very good Kenyan journalist, encountered Gift in the street and thought two things. He thought, number one, this isn't right. Children should not be begging for food on the streets of my country, aged 6. Never mind with dead siblings on their backs. And number two, I am a man of influence in this community and country, and I'm not using my influence at the moment for anything that's not myself. I'm going to change that. So this man took Gift into his house. He hired a woman to take care of her. He was at work all day, and began to raise Gift as his daughter. And I, in my keen amateur journalism, came back, and I used to write a weekly opinion column that ran in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, and I used it that Wednesday to write the single most sanctimonious and pious piece of prose I've ever produced on the subject of sacrifice, just asking people like me at that time, in the 20s and 30s, to think about using some of our time and our talent and our network and our money to benefit someone that wasn't us. And I used in the last paragraph a reference to that Kenyan journalist and Gift, and that sparked an outpour or an inpour of letters from readers in those 3 cities saying, we want to meet the writer, we want to meet you, we want to meet the Kenyan, we want to do something. So we got them all together one night in a room, said, hey, each of you bring 3 people, I'll bring 6, and let's see what happens. And Many Hopes was born that night based on my observation of a great injustice, of the sacrifice of one man who did something extraordinary, taking someone into their home. And 3, the response of readers to the power of story.
That is so important that you said one person started this. Because I think sometimes we get overwhelmed when we look at all the suffering in the world. We throw up our hands and go, what can I do? And this gentleman, this one person, took one child into his home, and look at the movement that started.
He took one girl into his home just because there was a need right there that he felt I should meet, and I have the ability to meet. He had no idea and no plan for what that would lead to.
Right.
But that's led to Many Hopes now serving 1,100 children every year in 6 countries. That is why Gift is our founder, and that is the power of one person doing one thing. We have never any idea what one word we say to someone, one word we don't say, or one thing we do or don't do it can be truly transformative and eternally transformative.
I believe that with all my heart. Now, also, I would like for you to talk about James, the amazing James. And his story is pretty incredible because he did come back and he gave back.
James's story is a perfect example of why Many Hopes exists and the potential for what can happen. When James lives in Ghana in West Africa, he's the leader of Many Hopes, partner there. When James was 6 years old, he was sold into child slavery in the country of Ghana. There's a place called Lake Volta, which is the largest man-made or human-made lake in the world by surface area, and it's the center of the commercial fishing industry in the country of Ghana, powered by child slaves. There are estimated 21,000 children working on fishing boats on that lake because it costs less to buy a child than it costs to buy a fishing net. Fishermen buy children to dive off the sides of boats into murky waters to untangle nets that are trapped in trees because it's a man-made lake. Children don't know what they're diving into. They lose their eyes and they lose their lives diving in to untangle nets. And it makes sense for the slave masters because they cost less to buy than a net does. James lived that life for 7 years.
He was one of those boys.
James was sold into slavery there, was one of those boys at the age of 6 for 7 years. At age 13, James escaped. He jumped into the trunk, I would say boot. He jumped into the trunk of a car, aged 13, and got away at a funeral and got away. He went through elementary school, went through high school, was brilliant, had an extraordinary mind. Got to college, was hired by Barclays Bank, and no one would have blamed James after all he'd been through if he'd lived a nice, comfortable life. But he didn't. After a few years at Barclays, he quit to go back to the lake he was enslaved on to rescue other children still there. And since then, James has rescued just over 1,800 other children, and some of them have now begun doing the same for others. That's an example of what Many Hopes is about. We believe at the moment James is a once or twice in a generation story. Why not 1,000 in a generation? Why not 10,000 in a generation? That's what we're about. That changes the conversation.
I know the story, and I still get chills when I hear it. Yeah, I get chills every time I hear this story because it is a perfect example of not just dumping money or charity on people. It goes back to your mission, to empower them, to make a life, and then to give back to others.
It is our core belief, right at the heart of Many Hopes, a core belief is that real change that lasts and transforms has to come from inside. That has to come from inside a person, inside a community, or inside a country. Outside help, necessary often, maybe at the beginning, maybe along the road somewhere, but ultimately it comes from within. So we partner with people inside and equip them to do what they want to do. They don't want to receive charity forever. There's no dignity in that. They want to solve they want to solve the brokenness around them. They just a little bit of partnership early on enable them to do that.
Well, I want to talk, because you say what's inside, I want to talk a little bit of what's inside you. You grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. That means barbed wire barricades and armed guards on the street. How did that impact what you're doing today?
I did. I grew up on a small sheep farm outside a small town in the small country of Northern Ireland. Life was a strange contrast of the beautiful and the barbaric, I suppose. It was the middle of a 30-year, pretty bloody conflict that we euphemistically call the Troubles.
Yes.
I think my background in Northern Ireland during the Troubles I draw upon that experience. That experience inspired what Many Hopes is about today, and here's how. I saw lots of horrible things happen to innocent people, innocent families. Everyone knew somebody who lost a cousin, a brother, a mother, a father. We all knew someone. And I was angry as a teenager. I thought those people are the enemy, and those people are not. You just grew up inheriting that division, those attitudes. And you can go one of two ways. You can think hateful thoughts and remain resentful and bitter and be part of the problem, or you can think maybe there's something can be different. Maybe there doesn't have to be. Unfortunately, because of my family background, a very loving, idyllic sheep farming family, I went that way. I went that route of solutions. I ended up working for one of the two political parties that architected and signed the peace agreement. I was irrelevant in that. I was a college-age young fella who mostly wrote speeches that were rolled up and brandished for emphasis more often than they were read out. But to be close to something like that, to be close to a peace agreement that changed a 30-year conflict into not, taught me the lesson that we carry into Many Hopes today, and that is seemingly unsolvable, seemingly intractable problems can be solved if enough people bring their individual influences to bear upon them. And we carry that into Many Hopes today. It had to come from inside Northern Ireland. We needed some external help. And lots of people from all across society who have different gifts, abilities, and capacities all had to come together to make something special happen.
Okay, so Northern Ireland, you travel the world, you're all over the world with Many Hopes. You meet a lot of people and you talk about, there's compassion, there's barbarity. You see all sides of life. Deep in your soul, do you believe people are inherently good or evil?
We have to choose one or the other.
Well, that's very dualistic thinking, I realize, but most of us are a combination of all of these various emotions. But I guess what I'm getting at is glimpses, and this is the book that I've written about finding little glimpses of God in the world. And by God, I'm not talking about the white-haired being. I'm talking about moments of grace, unexpected kindness, compassion, tenderness. What you just described in Gift and James, a moment of tenderness, a moment of grace, transformed lives and created an entire movement. Do you see glimpses in your travels? Do you see glimpses of God when you go about the world?
I see glimpses of God almost every day, but not as often as I would like to.
Okay.
Fundamentally, I believe we were created in the image of God, so we're created in the image of good and love, and the pace and the noise of life can drown that out sometimes. But if we stop and look and slow down a little bit, it's there. I'm wearing a little bracelet right here that was given to me by one of the children in Many Hopes Kenya program called Faith. She doesn't have anything, but she just wanted, out of somewhere within her, just wanted to do something nice for someone. There was no upside for her.
Right.
She just came up and gave me this as I left one day, seeing what some of our children, some of the children in each of our programs do for each other out of absolute lack is humbling when I contrast it to sometimes the lack of doing those things for each other when I'm back here and we live in abundance. But it's just moments of joyful human interaction. So I grew up in the church.
Uh-huh.
And one of my favorite Bible passages is from the book of Kings in the Old Testament, where where Elijah is in a cave and he's hiding. He's on the run, in fact. And the text reads, there was a mighty wind that broke the mountains and shattered the rocks, but God wasn't in the wind. And after the wind was an earthquake, but God wasn't in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but God wasn't in the fire. And after the fire, a gentle whisper, or some translations say a still small voice. Most of what Many Hopes does in its existence is be a still small voice to children. We see children be a still small voice to other children every day, saying things like, "It's not always going to be like this. It gets better. I was once there. It's going to be all right." And I see glimpses of majestic beauty from time to time. I was in Alaska once. I had the privilege of traveling to Alaska, and I never felt smaller, but I also never felt more grateful of I get to live in this world that's got spectacular things of just immense size and beauty that when my head's down at a keyboard, I forget about.
Yes.
Or I think of Moses in the burning bush, and you think, well, how slow and patient must Moses have been living to notice that bush is burning but not burning away? When you walk slowly enough, you see things that you don't when you rush.
You talk about listening to that still small voice, and I call it the spirit voice, or you can call it the true voice. It's that voice that lives inside you that never lies. But you made a good point. In order to hear that voice, you have to be still, you have to be quiet, and the world conspires against that. How do you find time to be quiet and listen to that still voice inside?
It's very difficult. I don't find time for it. I have to make time for it, and that's a deliberate choice that I don't always succeed at making every day, but I try to. I mean, just by drilling, like the logical side of my brain knows some things that it wants to make sure it acts out. Love and hurry are not really compatible. So it's hard to do both of those things. So I know that, and I want to be more loving than I want to be rushed. So I choose. I think was it Pascal that said the main problem, one of the biggest problems in the world, is man's inability to sit alone in his room quietly.
Yes.
So I try to do that, and I start small. I used to start with 10 minutes a day of just sitting still, not reading, not just sitting still with my thoughts, and then I try to grow that up to an hour now. But it's very difficult.
Well, I think it's imperative. I think in order to create, I think in order to pray, to connect, to tap into whatever we want to label that entity, that infinite intelligence, God, whatever, we have to sit still. We have to be quiet.
Yeah, I mean, two of the most difficult spiritual disciplines for me are the two of silence and solitude. I like people. I like to talk to people. I like to entertain people. I like a good laugh, but without deliberately choosing moments of silence and solitude, I'm a worse person.
Well, let me ask you about that, because I want to know, you see suffering, you're constantly helping children. What do you do to get a laugh? What do you do for fun? What's your idea of something that gives you joy?
Oh, I mean, if I say football, that'll suggest the ball's the wrong shape, but football and cricket give me joy and delight. But the main thing is people. It's banter, puns, fun chat. I'm very fond of.
That's not Irish at all.
No, that's not Irish
that's
at all.
not
Imagine.
Irish at all. No.
I mean, it's
banter and puns and chats and
it doesn't sound much like a hobby, but it wasn't a question about hobbies. It was what
brings you
life and
joy.
nourishment.
Yeah, just having conversation with people.
Conversation, and I mean, you don't have to spend long back home in chat with somebody, no matter what's happening, for someone to crack a joke, and